Hello, and welcome back to CryptoCast. I am your host, James Burney, and today we have a very exciting guest. If you are involved in the legal profession, you are likely already familiar with Chambers and Partners. For decades, Chambers has been one of the most trusted and influential legal directories in the world, known for its independent research, in-depth analysis, and highly regarded rankings of lawyers, law firms, and practice areas worldwide. These rankings are helping clients source the best lawyers and firms that can be found. But whilst we all know about the rankings, today we are going to discuss the Global Practice Guides, which are designed to give in-house counsel expert legal commentary on the main practice areas in key jurisdictions around the world. To help us understand the new Blockchain Global Practice Guide, I am delighted to be joined by Claire Oxborrow, Content Management Director at Chambers and Partners, who is responsible for overseeing the content produced by Chambers. Hi Claire, welcome to CryptoCast.
Hi James, thanks so much for inviting me on. It's great to be here.
So just kind of by way of quick background, because I know quite a lot of people listening to this aren't necessarily from the legal profession, so maybe less familiar with Chambers. Can you give a background of kind of what is Chambers and what does Chambers do?
Absolutely, James. Well, Chambers is the leading data and intelligence partner for the legal sector. And so our independent, rigorous, and trusted research identifies exceptional talent and crucial insights. And this allows our audience to really build success when using that. And firms and in house teams use Chambers rankings and intelligence to really enable themselves to see with clarity, decide with confidence, and plan with ambition.
And of course, you're interested in the global practice guides. Can you give kind of an idea of what the global practice guides are as well?
Yeah, absolutely, James, and you gave it a great introduction to that earlier. Now, as you said, so led by Chambers ranked experts, what we do at Global Practice Guides is provide really curated expert legal commentary across a range of sectors. And at the moment, we're looking at over 100 practice areas. And what we do with this content is we really enable users to identify and compare current legal issues across a range of jurisdictions and in really business critical practice areas and offer some really useful thought leadership as well on top of that.
And what caused Chambers to want to go into giving out practice guides? I mean, because traditionally it's always been a kind of ranking thing. Is it kind of leveraging existing knowledge, or what caused the practice guides to come about?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question, James. I mean, I think as you've identified, Chambers has been really well known for ranking the best legal experts around the world in a range of different practice areas for many years now. And what we really did is we were looking at all of these expert individuals and firms that we were identifying and thinking, you know what, we really need to provide a platform for them to share that expertise with Chambers' audience. And it just seemed like a no-brainer in terms of what we ought to do to actually give people access to that expert knowledge, to that intelligence, but actually have it presented on the Chambers platform.
And also because of course you know plenty of lawyers probably want to represent their countries in terms of discussing a particular area. How do you go about kind of creating the guide and selecting which authors to put forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when we create a global practice guide, so what we do is we're looking at both those chambers ranking tables that we've discussed earlier, but also we take a look at what's happening in legal markets around the world, what's really just happening across the world generally. And usually we find that these things are really reflective of each other. And then when we're doing that, we're thinking, are there areas of coverage that, for instance, are not reflected in current global practice guides that we have? Are there areas that we already cover quite broadly, but there's some really focused and developing areas that actually need a bit more coverage that we can really break out and have a guide on that area? Or even in some cases, we've got some smaller focus guides that would really benefit from creating a broader user journey by pulling together those focused areas into a high level, more broader guide. And then once we've really identified which titles we want to look at and introduce, then we will go back again to our rankings and to select a contributing editor. And then what we do is, in that sense, we will look for a global leader to actually lead and structure the guide. And they will collaborate with us to advise on the content structure and who we should have on board our guide, who are the leading experts that we should then look to our rankings to invite to lead the key jurisdictions that we feature.
It's just because you get kind of new areas coming and things come into fashion, kind of out of fashion. How do you know whether, to go ahead with something like, I know blockchain, I think, came out, but is one we're working on at the moment and is coming out soon, in effect. Then you've got AI coming as well. How do
Mm.
you keep track as to which kind of ones you want to sort of go for, effectively?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's a really good question, and it's quite interesting. And the answer is sometimes you never really know how well a guide will be received. I mean, you touched on AI there. When we introduced our first AI guide a number of years ago, when it really did seem to be an emerging and incredibly interesting guide. And when we first introduced it, it was compared to some other guides a relatively small guide. And then after a couple of editions, it's really exploded into being, as you can imagine, and as the AI sector has really exploded itself and everyone is now sort of looking at what's going on there, looking at what's developing. It's one of our biggest, most popular guides. And I think the same can be said with blockchain. And James, we're really delighted that you've come on board to take over the guide for this edition. And we first launched blockchain in 2020, and since then the guide has grown by 25% at least, and is probably going on to grow further in the next year. And I think what that really is a good example of is, when we first started the blockchain guide, it wasn't, I would say, an emerging sector, obviously, because it was quite established, which is why we were looking at it. But in terms of what we're talking about now, I think very different. So when we first introduced the guide, what we were finding that our contributing editors and contributors were talking about, they were talking about the evolution and consolidation of regulation to varying degrees across jurisdiction. And they were talking about the emergence of trends in the blockchain space, such as decentralized finance. And I think obviously the conversation that we would have about all of that could be quite different now. And it'd be really interesting to see what that looks like in the 2026 edition that's coming up in June, James. And I'd be interesting to what you would have to say and maybe turn the tables and ask you a question there. What are you expecting to see that might contrast or at least compare with what we were first seeing when we brought out the guide?
Yeah, I mean, the whole sector is currently changing. I mean, I think the thing which is sort of causing a bit of a migraine for lawyers, what I'm saying is the entire world is changing from a kind of more unregulated to a more regulated type of approach.
Hmm.
And then countries kind of splitting out into kind of two core groups, those which are so like the BVI and the Cayman Islands, which tend to be kind of smaller jurisdictions, but see it as a way of making money for the jurisdictions, a way kind of to kind of develop as a country. And then those which are kind of like markets you sell into, but it's more about consumer protection. So less sometimes about trying to promote business and more about protecting the consumers in the jurisdiction. And that's why I think we're going to see a great shift. I think the world's also going to converting more expensive also in terms of the cost of compliance with regulation. The idea that you launch in one country and can kind of go global, that's kind of become more and more of an illusion which is being shattered as people kind of need to get licensed or up and running in different countries in order to go
Hmm.
forwards. And I think that it also leads, I think, into kind of another question I've got, which is kind of when you look at it, you've got these people turning up. How are people kind of using these guys in practice? Is it kind of, what sort of things would you use for if you're going to look at the guides?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a good question that feeds on from what you were talking about there. And I think really the practice guides can be used in a variety of ways. And what we often find is the users will either focus in on a particular point of law from our law and practice sections and go straight to that, look at what they want to find out in a key jurisdiction. Equally, we often find that they might want to compare that same point across a range of jurisdictions. So if they're thinking of going into a number of jurisdictions, they want to see, like, are we looking at the same sort of set of regulations? Are we looking at the same set of issues across those jurisdictions? What do we need to know that might be different? Or equally, they might just want to really do a deep dive into a jurisdiction, not just, for instance, in blockchain, but in a range of practice areas and be thinking, if I'm going into that jurisdiction, what do I really need to know across a whole number of issues. They might be looking at blockchain, employment, or just more general corporate law. Or equally, we often find that users actually just want to be really thinking about in terms of thought leadership and analysis, and really looking at our trends and development sections, which are, positioned to offer expert opinion and analysis on the state of the market at a local level. So there are a number of different ways really that our users will use the guides, and that's really what they're designed to do and to offer, is to to say whatever you need to know about either a particular sector, a particular jurisdiction, or even a range, we can offer that at Global Practice Guides.
That's I think one of the things which is a kind of a common issue which I see, which is people think the law in the country is a certain way. Everything moves on, and suddenly what you get a whole lot of people thinking that the world is one way, but actually it's about 3 or 4 years out of date compared to what's really going on in the market. One of the issues is kind of like, how often are these kind of guides updated with kind of the latest trends and the rest of it? Because it's a common issue we're walking into is people are looking at the world and giving us things which are frankly 3 or 4 years out of date, effectively thinking that that's still the world as we know it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really something that's front of mind for us at Global Practice Guide. So, I mean, in short, we have a new edition of the guide every year, so sort of every 12 months. But I think what's really crucial and important based on what you've said is that when someone comes on board to either sort of be contributing editor or to author a chapter or take on leadership for a jurisdiction in these guides, they can at any point over that 12-month period update the guide to reflect any changes or any updates that will happen. And obviously that's particularly key when you've got fast moving practice areas where things are just changing all of the time and might change at any moment. So an annual guide that is updated constantly and can be updated constantly over the course of the year to make sure that we really are reflecting the most up-to-date analysis, the most up-to-date information.
And one I just want to also flag, just because it something is these guys are of course free on the internet effectively. So this is not only you have to pay in order to access and use the guide. Just because, how do people kind of find the guides? I mean, is something you just get off a straight Google search? What's the best way to find them?
Yeah, I mean, that can certainly happen, absolutely. And we find that we get quite a lot of organic traffic to the global practice guides. I think also, I mean, I think, we're simply Googling what you want to find out will take us there. Googling global practice guides, you'll find us easily accessed from the Chambers site as well. So, if you're looking at Chambers rankings as well, you'll find yourself directed across to the global practice guides to get that additional thought leadership information.
And because again, I don't know how long the guides have been going, but how have you found it? Has uptake sort of increased over time as more people sort of have come to use them, or how's it looking?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a really strong readership for global practice guides, and we found that around, which is quite interesting, really, 75% of the readership comes from outside of the legal industry, I think, which is really showing us that we are finding an audience that's coming to the guides looking for actionable advice from legal experts. And I think a really interesting example of that is that we know that the majority of Fortune 500 and FTSE 100 companies do in fact view the guide. So that's a really interesting piece of information there, which tells us that we're actually getting people that actually want to really use the information they're finding and actually find out who the experts are that might further advise them.
And these things don't start. Are there any exciting future plans for global practice guides which you're particularly interested in? Kind of almost new areas of law or new countries being added to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're always looking at growth across the board at Global Practice Guides, and that will always mean introducing new titles and looking to add jurisdictions that we might not cover. And I think what that also means as well is not only sort of adding new titles and new jurisdictions per se, but also we look at always at our existing guides and thinking, are there new jurisdictions that should be added based on developments and trends in the area, and also at the content itself. So for every time, I said earlier that we have a new edition of the guide each year. Before launching that, we'll always collaborate with the contributing editor to look at, do we need to add anything to the structure of the guide to reflect new trends? So the guides themselves are always developing and always growing. And then I think what I would say is do look out in the coming months for a new updated Global Practice Guides website that we're very excited about.
What's caused you excited about the new website?
Well, it's just excited because it's the new one. We've had our Global Practice Guides website as is for quite some time now. And we're very excited to sort of integrate it into the wider Chambers site and also offer some sort of refreshed and exciting features, which I will be talking about a little bit more in due course.
Sounds really exciting and very much looking forward to it. I think these guys are absolutely brilliant, particularly because
Mm.
just the cost of compliance is getting bigger and bigger. So anything which gives you a kind of a free snapshot globally is always going to be very much encouraged. And what's been particularly fantastic about them is the fact it's got legal law firms right across different bits. So it is kind of actual specialists in the field talking about it. Thank you, Claire, for coming on. It's been absolutely fantastic and really looking forward and yeah, delighted to be involved in the new blockchain. I'm really looking forward to see what comes out.
Thanks, James, and we're really looking forward to seeing the new blockchain guide that it comes out with you later on in the year.